I know this video might sound a little bit like clickbait, so before you leave a dislike, just please hear me out. I love Elden Ring, and you can see my in-depth thoughts on the game here, but I also do think that it is the least replayable FromSoft game. Now, I know some of you watching this might be thinking, this game's massive, so much build variety, why would a Souls fan ever stop coming back to such a great game? Well, let me tell you, PvP is terrible, as we all know, and replaying the game to learn boss mechanics a lot of the time just isn't fun, especially with the endgame bosses, and the joy gained from exploring the open world ultimately is finite. Before I get into the video, I want to say a spoiler warning for the endgame Elden Ring boss gameplay, as well as one of the final bosses in the Dark Souls 3 Ring City DLC. And if you do like the video, please subscribe and like, it would mean a lot to me. I'll start by covering the least controversial of the statements that I made. It's no secret that PvP is bad in Elden Ring. Now, I'm no PvP expert, but I do the occasional invasion, and I can tell you it's nowhere near as fun as Dark Souls 3. No more giant fight clubs, no more 1v1 invasions, maybe that's for the best. They took out 1v1 invasions just to hide PvP for more players so they didn't realize that it's just plain broken. And speaking of PvP being broken, there's a few meta builds that do such ridiculous damage that I cannot understand how FromSoft thought it was acceptable to not have separate damage stats for PvE and PvP. I'm okay with OP weapons to help make bosses a bit easier, God knows this game needs it, but that shouldn't come at the cost of the PvP community. This community helps keep FromSoft games alive, and I don't think that it will survive much longer in this current state. With that out of the way, let's move on to the more controversial point I made. The boss mechanics just aren't that fun to learn. I've made a multitude of videos explaining my thoughts in depth on Elden Ring bosses, but here's a quick summary. Many bosses can attack endlessly unless you bait out a couple of punishable attack windows, much less than previous games. And if their infinite combo doesn't hit you, they also have input reading just in case you punish when you weren't doing one of their few punishable attacks. Bosses also force a player who does not use summons to run so very far away to heal, which is more time consuming than fun. Some bosses like Melania or Elden Beast have either undodgeable or just very hard to dodge attacks that almost require Bloodhound Step, and damage is just so freaking high in this game. Now, if someone watching this video uses summons or a lot of magic, they might be confused at why I think this matters so much. So just let me explain it this way. There are three major groups of players when looking at how they interact with bosses in Elden Ring. Players who are challenged when using magic and summons, so they enjoy the experience. Players who don't do challenge runs, but they do play a normal leveled melee character with either no summons or somewhat minimal summon use. And then there's the level 1 run or the challenge run community that are just complete masochists, me included. I think that Elden Ring is a fantastic game for the first category of player. If a player can die a few times to a boss and then use a bit of personal skill with your summons or magic to beat the boss, then Elden Ring really does suit them. I don't want to sound like an elitist, but I do actually envy these types of players. If I could die a good amount of times or be challenged with summons and magic, then I would really enjoy Elden Ring fights. The only issue is that I don't know if this type of player really likes replaying the game too much, since they aren't learning too much about the bosses mechanically. I'm not trying to say in any way that your run is invalid for using magic. I'm not trying to gatekeep. All I'm saying is that when you bring a gun to a sword fight with a couple of homies to back you up, every boss will play more or less the same. Essentially, this type of player will just split aggro and then shoot the boss when they're attacking someone else, which kind of makes every boss feel very similar on a mechanical level. So I couldn't imagine this type of player replaying Elden Ring over and over again for the boss fights specifically. The second group of player is one who does learn a good amount of the boss mechanics. I'll call them the average skilled player. They probably beat Dark Souls 3, no summons, except for maybe a couple of bosses that they had trouble on, like Midir or Sister Freedy, but they really do want a bit of challenge. Elden Ring probably failed them the most. As I mentioned in my critique in a couple of my other videos, a lot of bosses in Elden Ring have very few good openings, causing them to attack nonstop until they do the one thing you know you can punish. This breaks the old flow state of combat for many fights. The typical Dark Souls dance isn't really in Elden Ring, especially in the endgame. I know Godfrey and Radagon are pretty good and dance-like, but they're definitely the exception. Please remember that for every Radagon, there is also an Elden Beast. This second type of player, who usually never summons, might spend over 10 hours fighting Melania at a normal level just to respec to a more meta katana or dual-wielding colossal strength build just so that they can trade, or they might even use mimic Mimic too just to ensure the victory. Even if this group of players beat Malenia without Mimic, having to trade down bosses with ridiculous damage doesn't leave you with a sense of mastery or learning the fight, because the fight gave you so few openings. These players might grow very frustrated that they have to summon or use the best weapons to have a chance at winning since they don't want to play that way, but they also really don't like the endgame bosses that kind of forces them to play that way. When you beat a boss in Elden Ring like Malenia, do you think, yeah, that was a good hard fight, I can't wait to beat her again in another run? Or do you think, thank the Lord it's finally over so I can stop fighting this boss? If you think the latter, then you probably won't find yourself coming back to Elden Ring time and time again for the bosses specifically. The third type of player is one like me, a level 1 runner, and I really enjoy a good challenge, but I'd be lying if I said I'd do another Elden Ring level 1 run anytime soon. This is because I don't find the endgame bosses mechanically fun. However, when I say this, I often hear the counter argument, it's hard, it's not supposed to be fun. If you really think that a hard game isn't fun, why are you going to play it more than once? You already got the satisfaction of winning a mechanically unfun but super hard fight, so why would you go back? In Dark Souls 3, I went back because the boss mechanics are genuinely fun to improve at and try to theory craft new winning strategies every new run through the game. I actually have a level 1, no ring, no armor, no weapon upgrade Dark Souls 3 run that's right before Pontiff currently, and I had a blast getting there despite being on one of the hardest difficulties possible. Actually, I still use Estus and a weapon, but with those two exceptions, I still think that the no-nothing level 1 Dark Souls 3 run has been fun for me. After doing a Dark Souls 3 or Dark Souls 1 level 1 run, I can curb stop almost all of the bosses on a normal level because I've mechanically mastered their movesets. This is not true for Elden Ring. In Elden Ring, I see the boss do a 10 attack combo without an opening, get bored, trade damage, and sometimes I die, and sometimes I get lucky and they don't dash away and I win. I can do a no-hit level 1 run in Malenia and still have trouble at a normal level because I got bored of the boss's input reading and infinite combos and waterfall dance baiting. It's more boring than it is actually difficult. I know what the game wants me to do to win. I've literally beaten Malenia level 1, no hit, no weapon art, no parry, but that doesn't really matter. It just wasn't fun for me, and I will not be returning to Elden Ring for the challenging boss battles. To summarize, if you think that Dark Souls bosses aren't supposed to be fun because they're supposed to be hard for hardcore gamers, then I think you're wrong. Dark Souls bosses are a lot of fun when you put the work in. Elden Ring bosses are not fun for me no matter how much I perfect my gameplay, so I won't be returning to this game to improve my skill at beating bosses like I did in previous Souls entries. Just to prove this point, you guys know what I did when I beat all of the hardest bosses in Dark Souls 3 at level 1? I did it again. And you know what I said when I beat all of the hardest Elden Ring bosses at level 1? Thank God I never have to do that again. If the majority of melee players and challenge runners don't enjoy replaying the game for the boss fights, then we might do the same thing as the PvPers. Go back to Dark Souls 3 or Dark Souls 1 or Bloodborne or whatever Souls game you want to go back to, as long as you don't have to keep dealing with Elden Ring bosses. So by my somewhat pessimistic prediction, I think that a great majority of PvPers and PvEers will probably go back and play older FromSoft games. That only leaves the more casual summons or magic users left, and while I'm not that type of person, I do imagine that they get more fun out of exploration than fighting the bosses themselves. But exploration has a shelf life, as I mentioned in the beginning of the video. If you explore a lot, then you'll find that every new dungeon feels a bit too similar. Every new boss is a bit copy and paste. Every new reward for exploration pales in comparison to what you already have. In fact, most rewards you find are going to be worthless, so when you replay the game, you'll probably just look up where the best stuff is for your build, get it, and then do little else. Why do that random cave? There's no smithing stones that you need in that specific cave, so why do it just for the enjoyment of fighting another repeat boss in another familiar feeling dungeon? The exploration really does start to fall apart a bit after you've already beaten the game once or twice. Elden Ring is an amazing experience your first time through, but after a couple of runs through the game, I actually think this might be the least replayable of all of them. other than maybe Dark Souls 2. Almost like FromSoft accidentally hurt every community that tends to replay the game over and over and over again and keep the game alive by making the weapons too strong for PvP and bosses too strong for PvE on a mechanical level. The only people that are left to enjoy this game are people using summons and magic, or also the melee no summons people who disagree with me and they genuinely enjoy the boss fights. This group of people do also exist. If you are the former, then I'd be pleasantly surprised if you're still playing in 6 months, because I guess you really love curb stomping bosses with the best shit in the game, and that's great, more power to you. And if you are a melee no summons person who enjoys FromSoft's new boss design, that's cool too. I just can't bring myself to replay Elden Ring again anytime soon. As I stated before, I might never replay the game at level 1 no summons as I did before. It was not fun like how Dark Souls 1 and 3 level 1 no summons were fun. In fact, I actually think Dark Souls 3 specifically is a better game at level 1 than at a normal level, which is something I will get into in my Dark Souls 3 critique. I think that Dark Souls 3 is more fun in hard mode because the boss mechanics are that fun, and I think that Elden Ring is less fun in hard mode being level 1. So what do you guys think? Will Elden Ring die? Now, this might not happen since new players are still joining the numbers and the DLC will come out, but I'm really curious in maybe 3 to 5 years when there is a new Souls game, how will we remember this game? Will we go back to Elden Ring bosses like we go back to Gale and Sister Friede in Dark Souls 3? My answer is honestly no. I think Elden Ring might be the best Souls game ever your first time through, and every subsequent playthrough is quite a lot worse from the first one as I ignore PvP like the plague, and I don't look forward to so many of the bosses. And one last question before I end this video. Will the DLC bosses be worse than Melania? I really hope not for our sakes.